The day Alice Mayfield was traded for a lie she didn't even tell, the sun was a hammer over Prescott, Arizona. It beat the dust of the main street into a powder so fine it choked the very air you breathed. For 20-year-old Alice, it might as well have been the dirt for her own grave. She stood there all alone with the whole town watching. Her simple calico dress felt like a flag of surrender. The shame they put on her was so thick you could feel it, a heavy cloak woven from whispers and stares. Before her, sitting on a powerful paint horse, was a man who looked like he'd been carved from the canyons and mountains themselves. An Apache warrior named Kyle. He was the price for her family's honor, the savage they were sending her away with. Her father, the town blacksmith, a man of iron and pride, couldn't even look at her. She was being traded, a life for a lie. And in that suffocating silence, the only thing she expected was a new kind of hell. She was certain her life was over, but she had no idea the truth was 100 times stranger than the lie. The lie was born 3 weeks earlier, in the cool shadows of a livery stable. It was a lie that smelled of hay, cheap whiskey, and the sweet, sick scent of a forbidden touch. Alice wasn't there, but she saw what it did to her younger sister, Clara. She saw it in Clara's 16-year-old eyes, wide with a terror that was too old for her face. Clara, with her corn silk hair and a soul too gentle for the Arizona territory, had been found with Silas Wolfe. And Silas Wolfe wasn't just any boy. He was the son of Damon Wolfe, the man who owned the bank, the general store, and the mortgage on nearly every person in Prescott. Silas was weak and spoiled, but his name was a shield. Clara's name, Mayfield, only meant hard work and simple decency. Their father, Thomas, was a proud man, but when Damon Wolfe stormed into their little house, his face a thundercloud, Thomas seemed to shrink beside his own anvil. "Your daughter," Wolfe had spat, his voice like a whip, "has sullied my son. She tempted him." It was a ridiculous claim. Everyone knew Silas had a taste for drinking cards, but Damon Wolfe didn't care about facts. He made his own. Clara, trembling, started to speak, to confess her part in it, but Alice saw the ruin in her father's eyes. The Mayfields would lose everything. Clara would be branded for life. So Alice stepped forward. "It was me," she said, her voice impossibly steady. "Clara had nothing to do with it. It was I who met with Silas." It was a crazy gamble. Alice was quiet, sharp, and reserved, the last person to mess with Silas Wolfe. But Damon Wolfe seized it. It was cleaner this way. Punishing the older, stronger daughter made a better statement. It let him paint his own boy as the victim of a cunning seductress. And the punishment he came up with was worse than any public whipping. A group of Chiricahua Apache were coming to town to negotiate safe passage for supply wagons. Tensions were high after a recent skirmish left men dead on both sides. In a show of what he called frontier justice, Wolfe made an offer to their leader, the warrior named Kyle. The town would give one of its women to the Chiricahua. Not as a hostage, he claimed, but as a bridge of peace. Everyone knew what it really was. She was a human sacrifice. She was Alice's banishment. And so she stood there in the heat, the whole town her jury. That morning, her father had pressed a worn, leather-bound book into her hands, her mother's book of herbs and remedies. "Your mother would have wanted you to have this," he'd choked out. Her sister Clara was a ghost at the window, her face a silent scream of guilt. Kyle watched her from his horse. His face was a landscape of hardship and patience. His dark, intelligent eyes weren't filled with lust or hate. He just watched her, with a strange, analytical calm that was more terrifying than any open threat. He was younger than the other warriors, maybe 30, but he moved with an authority that was absolute. He wasn't some caricature from a dime novel. He was real, which made Alice's fate feel terrifyingly real. Sheriff Brody, a man whose spine was bent to Damon Wolfe's will, cleared his throat. "The agreement is made," he announced. "Alice Mayfield goes with the Yurnee, the people, as a sign of our enduring faith." Wolfe gave a grim, satisfied smile. He had scrubbed his family's name clean with Alice's life. Kyle nudged his horse forward. He didn't dismount. He just held out a hand, a strong, calloused hand, scarred across the knuckles. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command. Alice took a deep breath, the air thick with her own disgrace. She looked past Kyle, to the jagged blue mountains on the horizon. Her new home or her grave. She didn't know which. Ignoring his hand, she walked to the spare horse tied to his lead rope. With a strength she didn't know she had, she gathered her skirts and pulled herself into the saddle. It wasn't graceful, but she did it herself. A murmur went through the crowd. Kyle's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise? Respect? He gave a sharp command to his men, and without a single look back at Prescott, they turned their horses east. The dust rose behind them, a curtain falling on the first act of her life. She was a disgraced woman, their unlikely prize. But no one in that town, not even Alice herself, knew the real reason the Apache warrior had accepted the deal. And that secret was more dangerous than any lie. The world she knew vanished behind her. The clapboard houses, the church steeple, the smell of wood smoke and baking bread. It all faded away, replaced by the raw perfume of the desert. Sagebrush, hot rock, and a terrifying endless emptiness. For 3 days they rode in a silence that felt like its own language, one she couldn't understand. The Apache warriors spoke to each other in low, flowing tones, a music of clicks and soft vowels. They said nothing to her. Kyle rode at the head of the party, a part of the land itself. His eyes were constantly scanning, reading the subtle signs of the earth, a broken twig, a disturbed patch of pebbles, the flight of a hawk. He never looked back at her, but she felt his awareness of her like a physical weight. She was a package he was delivering, a responsibility he'd taken on for reasons she couldn't possibly imagine. Her body ached. The sun was a relentless enemy, and the nights were a shock of cold that seeped into her bones. They ate jerky as tough as leather and drank sparingly from canteens. No one offered her comfort, but no one offered her cruelty either. She was simply an object, a ghost riding among them. The other warriors watched her, their eyes holding a mix of curiosity and contempt. One, a younger man with a perpetual scowl and a jagged scar on his cheek, made his hatred clear. His name was Taza, and his eyes followed her with open hostility. To him, she was just a white woman, an interloper, the symbol of a people who had taken their land and broken every promise. He would spit on the ground when she drew her water ration, his meaning perfectly clear without a single word. On the third evening, as they made camp in a rocky arroyo, Alice's resolve finally started to crack. Her hands were blistered, her lips were bleeding. As she slid from her horse, her legs buckled and she fell hard onto the stony ground. A sharp, white-hot pain shot through her ankle. Taza let out a short, ugly laugh. The other warriors just ignored her. She lay there for a moment, the dust gritty against her cheek, a wave of pure despair washing over her. The tears she'd refused to shed in Prescott now burned behind her eyes. This was it. They would just leave her here, a broken toy in the middle of nowhere. But then a shadow fell over her. Kyle. He stood there, his face unreadable in the dying light. He looked down at her, then at her ankle, which was already starting to swell. He said nothing. He just crouched, and before she could even think to react, his strong fingers probed the injury. His touch was firm, clinical, not gentle at all, but surprisingly sure. He moved the joint, his eyes locked on her face, gauging her reaction. She bit her lips so hard she tasted blood, refusing to cry out. He stood up and walked away, disappearing into the twilight. Alice's heart sank. He was leaving her. It was exactly what she expected. But moments later he returned. He was holding a handful of broad, fleshy leaves. He crushed them between two stones, creating a green, pungent poultice. He knelt again. He took her barefoot in his hand, an act of such shocking intimacy it stole her breath, and carefully applied the crushed leaves to her swollen ankle. Then, using a strip of leather from his own saddlebag, he bound it tightly. He met her eyes then, for the first time since the journey began. His gaze was intense, unreadable, deep as a starless night. "It is not broken," he said. His English was accented but clear. "You will ride." It wasn't meant as a comfort. It was a command. But it was also the first time anyone had acknowledged that she was more than just cargo. She was a person who could break, and who, in his mind, needed to be mended to continue the journey. She just nodded, unable to speak. That small act of care felt more confusing than the cruelty. She was his prisoner, his prize, but he wouldn't let her break. Not yet. And she was beginning to suspect that Kyle, the silent warrior, had a plan for her. A plan that had nothing to do with peace. They arrived at the Chiricahua Rancheria at dusk on the fifth day. It wasn't the village of teepees she had imagined. It was a scattered encampment nestled in a high mountain valley, shielded by towering pines. The dwellings, called wickiups, were dome-shaped structures of branches and hides that blended into the landscape. Smoke from cooking fires carried the scent of roasting meat and pine needles. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. Women stopped their work, children fell silent, their dark eyes wide with curiosity and suspicion. They stared at Alice, at her pale skin and strange clothes. She was an alien creature dropped into their world. Taza dismounted and immediately started speaking in a rapid, angry torrent to a group of elders, gesturing back at Alice. His meaning was obvious. "This is what our leader has brought us." A white woman. Kyle ignored him completely. He dismounted and addressed an old woman who emerged from the largest wickiup. She was ancient, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles, her hair white and braided with silver. There was a deep wisdom in her eyes, a calm authority that reminded Alice of a mountain that had weathered 1,000 storms. Kyle spoke to her in their language, his tone filled with a deep respect he had shown no one else. The old woman, whose name Alice would learn was Nalan, listened patiently. Her gaze then fell on Alice, and it was different from the others. It wasn't hostile, but it was profoundly searching, as if she were looking straight into Alice's soul and weighing her spirit. Nalan spoke a single word to Kyle, then turned and pointed toward a small, isolated wickiup at the very edge of the camp. It was little more than a hut. The message was clear. "You are here, but you are not one of us." Kyle turned to Alice. "This is your place," he said, his voice flat. He handed her a water skin and a small bundle of jerky and ground corn. "You will be given food. You are expected to work." He pointed toward a group of women grinding corn on flat stones. "You will help them tomorrow." And with that, he turned and walked toward the center of the camp, leaving her completely alone. The weight of her solitude was immense. She had been delivered. Her journey was over, but her trial had just begun. That night, huddled under a single, thin blanket, Alice clutched the book her father had given her and wept. She wasn't weeping for the home she had lost, but for the utter, crushing loneliness of the one she had found. She had been cast out, traded, and now she was an outcast all over again. A single, pale ghost in a world that didn't want her. She fell asleep wondering if she would survive the week. What she didn't know was that in the main wickiup, Kyle was in a fierce debate with Nalan, his grandmother. "You see only a white woman," he said, his voice low and intense. "I see a weapon." Nalan's ancient eyes were sharp. "A weapon that can cut both ways, my son. Be careful the blade is not pointed at your own heart." The days that followed were a crucible, designed to grind her down to dust. Alice rose before the sun to haul water from the cold mountain stream. The Apache women were strong and tireless, and they offered her no help. They communicated with gestures, pointing her toward tasks, scraping hides until her arms burned, gathering firewood until her back screamed, grinding corn on a metate until her knees were numb. Taza and his friends made her life a quiet misery. They would accidentally kick over her bucket of water, forcing her to make the long trip to the stream again. They would mutter insults just loud enough for her to hear. The Apache word for white woman, Inda Likova, spoken like a curse. Alice learned to build a wall around her heart. She kept her head down, her hands busy, and her face a mask of neutrality. She did the work without a single complaint. She knew she was being tested and she refused to break. Her only quiet ally was Nalan, Kyle's grandmother. The old woman would often watch her from the entrance of her wickiup. One afternoon, as Alice struggled to soften a stiff deer hide, her hands clumsy and raw, Nalan approached. She didn't speak. She simply took the scraping tool from Alice's hand and with practiced, efficient motions, showed her the proper angle, the right pressure. Alice watched, mesmerized. She mimicked the old woman, and the work became instantly easier. A silent lesson had been given and received. This became their routine. Nalan would teach her through demonstration how to find edible roots, how to weave a watertight basket, how to stitch with sinew. And Alice, in turn, began to learn. She listened. She picked up words, then phrases. Gojo, beauty, balance. Shiki, my friend. Hosh, cactus. The world around her slowly began to have names. Kyle remained a distant, formidable presence. He was the Nantan, the leader. His days were spent hunting, leading patrols, and holding council with the elders. He rarely spoke to her, but she felt his eyes on her constantly. She would see him watching as she learned to bake bread on a hot stone, or as she tried to soothe a crying baby. He observed her struggles and her small triumphs from afar, his expression as unreadable as ever. His silence was a constant question mark. Why had he accepted the deal? What did he truly want from her? Her breakthrough came on a night when a fever swept through the camp. It was a vicious, consuming heat that struck the youngest and the oldest first. The medicine man, a stern figure named Doda, performed his chants and offered his sacred pollen, but the fever didn't yield. A little boy, the son of a warrior named Chato, was convulsing, his skin burning hot. His mother's wails were a knife in the heart of the anxious camp. Alice watched, her own heart aching. The boy's symptoms were terrifyingly familiar. She had seen this fever before near Prescott. She hesitated, knowing the danger of interfering. She was an outsider. To challenge the medicine man's authority was unthinkable. But as she watched the boy struggle for breath, she saw the face of her own sister, Clara, small and vulnerable. She thought of her mother, and the book her father had given her felt warm against her skin. She made a decision. Taking a deep breath, she walked to Nalan's wickiup. Grandmother, she said in her halting, newly learned Apache, using the term of respect. The boy, the fever. I have seen it. Nalan's dark eyes were sharp. Doda's medicine is strong. It is, Alice agreed carefully. But my mother, she knew the plants of the white man. There is a tree that grows by the water. The willow. Its bark can break a fever. She opened her book, its pages filled with her mother's delicate script and drawings, and pointed to the sketch of a willow tree. Nalan studied the drawing for a long, tense moment. It was a risk for her, too, to trust this outsider's medicine over their own. But the boy was dying. Show me, Nalan said finally. Guided by Alice, a few women hurried to the stream and stripped bark from the willows. They boiled it into a dark, bitter tea. Alice felt the hostile stares of Doda and Taza as she worked, but Nalan's presence was her shield. With the old woman's approval, the boy's mother agreed to try the remedy. Alice helped the mother gently spoon the bitter liquid between the boy's cracked lips. For hours she sat with them, bathing his forehead with cool water, speaking to him in soft English tones. The entire camp held its breath. Just before dawn, the crisis broke. The boy's convulsions stopped. A great sweat drenched his small body, and his breathing eased. The fever had broken. By morning he was weak but lucid, asking for water. A wave of quiet awe moved through the camp. The mother wept with gratitude, clutching Alice's hand. Chato, the boy's father, a stoic warrior, came to her and placed a hand over his heart in a gesture of profound thanks. Even some of Tasa's friends looked at her with a new, grudging respect. That evening, as Alice sat outside her small wickiup, Kyle approached. It was the first time he had sought her out since their arrival. The boy lives, he said. It was not a question. Yes, she replied softly. He was silent for a long moment. In your town, he began, his voice low, they cast you out for bringing shame. Here you bring healing. He looked around the valley, at the wickiups glowing with the soft light of their fires. My wife, he said, his voice suddenly thick with an old pain that startled her, was taken by a fever like this. Before the white soldiers came to this valley, my daughter too, our medicine was not strong enough. It was a revelation that cracked his stoic facade, offering her a glimpse of the man beneath the warrior. He had suffered an unbearable loss. He saw in her act of healing not just the saving of a child, but a ghost of what could have been for his own family. I am sorry, she whispered. He shook his head as if to clear the memory. He looked down at her, and his eyes held a new light. Not pity, but a deep, resonant understanding. The people of Prescott did not know what they were throwing away, he said, his voice quiet but firm. They cast you out, but you do not belong to them. He paused, and his next words hung in the cool night air, heavy with meaning. You belong here. It was not a declaration of love, not yet. It was something more fundamental, a statement of belonging. He was telling her that her place was not defined by her past, but by her actions. Here, in this wild, harsh land, she had found a purpose. For the first time since she had taken her sister's blame, Alice felt the first fragile tendrils of a new beginning. She felt, impossibly, that she was home. But peace on the frontier is a fragile thing, and the past has a way of crawling out of its grave when you least expect it. The delicate peace Alice found was as fragile as the desert flower. Her acceptance in the tribe grew day by day. The women now included her in their conversations, teaching her their stories and songs. Chato and his family treated her as honored kin. Even Tassa's animosity had softened to a weary, watchful truce. He no longer saw a weak white woman, but a person of undeniable medicine. Her relationship with Kyle deepened in quiet moments and unspoken understanding. He would seek her out to discuss the properties of a plant or to share a piece of smoked venison. He taught her the Chiricahua names for the stars, weaving for her the stories of their creation. The shame of Prescott was a distant scar, but the past wasn't dead. It was just wandering, lost in the desert. 2 months after her arrival, a pair of Apache scouts found a white man. He was delirious with thirst and fever, his horse long gone, his clothes ripped to shreds. He was near death. They brought him back to the rancheria, a strange piece of wreckage washed up on their shores. Nalene and Alice were called to tend to him. As Alice knelt beside the unconscious figure, wiping the grime from his face with a damp cloth, her blood ran cold. The face, now gaunt and bearded, was horribly familiar. It was Silas Wolfe. The breath caught in her throat. He was the reason she was here, the cause of the lie that had shattered her life. Seeing him here, in the heart of the Apache camp, felt like a waking nightmare. Nellen saw the look on her face. "You know this man?" she asked softly. Alice could only nod, her mind reeling. Under their care, Silas slowly recovered. When he finally opened his eyes and they focused on Alice, his face crumpled with terror, astonishment, and a profound, soul-deep shame. "Alice!" he rasped. "What? How?" The story came out in a torrent of guilt. Consumed by what his father had done, Silas had finally confronted Damon. He demanded his father tell the town the truth and bring Alice back. Damon had reacted with cold fury, threatening to disown Silas and have him committed as a madman. Terrified and broken, Silas had fled Prescott in the dead of night, riding aimlessly into the wilderness, intending to simply disappear. His confession, however, was not made in private. Taza had been standing just outside the wickiup, listening. He didn't understand all the English words, but he understood father, lie, and Alice. He understood the name Wolf. He burst into the hut, his face a mask of fury, and dragged Silas outside. He threw him into the center of the camp and bellowed the story for all to hear. The truth spread like wildfire, and it was far uglier than anyone had imagined. Alice had not been given in shame for her own sin. She had been a scapegoat, a sacrifice to cover the sins of a powerful man's son. The peace offering from Prescott was a lie, built on a foundation of deeper lies. The mood in the camp shifted instantly. The newfound respect for Alice curdled into a renewed, furious anger at the deceit of the Inda. Taza's hostility returned with a vengeance. "This is the truth of them," he snarled at an emergency council Kyle convened that evening. He jabbed a finger at Silas, who was being held under guard. "They send us an innocent woman to cover their own filth. They speak of peace while their hearts are rotten with lies." He pointed at Silas. "This man is the son of the one who deceived us. His life should be forfeit for the insult." Many warriors murmured in agreement. Their pride had been wounded. They had been made fools of. An eye for an eye was the law of the mountains. Kyle listened, his face like carved stone. His eyes found Alice, who stood at the edge of the circle. The revelation had placed him in an impossible position. His authority rested on his ability to protect his people's honor. To let this insult stand was a sign of weakness. To kill Silas Wolfe, however, would be an act of war, but the choice was about to be taken from him. Back in Prescott, Damon Wolf was not idle. When he discovered Silas was gone, his rage turned to cold panic. He couldn't risk Silas being found. He couldn't risk the truth coming out. So he manufactured a new, more dangerous lie. He burst into Sheriff Brody's office, his face a mask of paternal grief. "The Apache!" he'd roared. "They've taken my boy! Their raiding parties have become bold! They must have circled back and abducted him!" The story was thin, but in the volatile atmosphere of the frontier, fear was more potent than logic. Damon called for a posse. He offered good money, invoking the sacred duty of protecting their own from savage depredations. Men who owed him money, men who craved adventure, and men who were genuinely afraid all joined his cause. Sheriff Brody reluctantly deputized the mob. Their stated mission was to rescue Silas Wolf. Their true mission, known only to Damon, was to ride to Kyle's camp and eliminate the evidence. He intended to wipe out the entire band, silencing Alice, Silas, and any Apache who knew the truth, forever. A lone Apache hunter, tracking deer in the foothills, saw the dust cloud of the approaching posse. He saw the glint of dozens of rifles in the sun. He rode like the wind to bring the news. War was coming. It was riding hard for the valley, and it wore the face of Damon Wolf. The hunter's warning plunged the camp into a state of disciplined chaos. The idyllic valley was instantly transformed into a fortress. Women and children were hurried to hidden caves high in the canyon walls, their movements swift and silent. Warriors checked their rifles, sharpened their arrows, and painted their faces for the battle to come. The air, once filled with the scent of pine and roasting meat, now tasted of adrenaline and impending violence. In the center of it all stood Kyle, a storm of impossible choices raging within him. Taza and the war party were adamant. "We must strike first," Taza argued, his voice ringing with fervor. "Ambush them in the narrow pass, and we kill the white man prisoner now. Let them find his body. It will be our answer to their lies." Silas Wolf, tied between two guards, trembled, his face a sickly white. His cowardly flight had brought an army down on them all. But Kyle's gaze was fixed on Alice. In the past months, she had become more than a pawn. She had become a part of the fabric of their lives, a part of his life. He saw the terror in her eyes, but beneath it, a steely resolve he had come to admire. "Killing him solves nothing," Alice said, her voice cutting through the war cries. She stepped into the council circle, a shocking breach of tradition, but no one stopped her. "It will only prove to them that Damon's lies are true. They will see you as killers who abducted his son." "They see us as killers already," Taza countered. "What is your plan, white woman? To serve them tea made from your willow bark?" A few warriors laughed, but Kyle silenced them with a single, sharp look. "Let her speak. Damon Wolf is leading them," Alice said, her voice gaining strength. "But not all of them are like him. Sheriff Brody is there. He is a weak man, but not an evil one. The others are just ranchers and townsmen who have been fed a lie. They think they are on a rescue mission. If they see Silas is alive, if they hear the truth from him, some of them might listen." "Listen to an Apache?" Taza scoffed. "They will shoot before we can speak." "They won't listen to an Apache," Alice agreed, her gaze locking with Kyle's. "But they might listen to a white woman, and to the son of the man who lied to them." A daring, desperate plan began to form in the space between them. It was a gamble that risked everything, but it was the only path that didn't lead to a senseless slaughter. Kyle made his decision. He would not hide and wait for the attack. He would meet it, but on his own terms. He divided his forces. Taza and a small group of the best warriors would take to the high ridges, a hidden threat to show that the Apache would not be caught unprepared. The rest would prepare defenses at the mouth of the valley. Then Kyle turned to Alice. "You believe the truth has power." "I believe it is the only thing that does," she answered. "Then you will have your chance to prove it," he said. He ordered Silas to be untied. "You will ride with us." As Wolf's posse thundered into the wide basin that led to the valley, they were met with a startling sight. Not an ambush, not a deserted camp, but Kyle and a handful of his warriors sitting on their horses in the open. They were not painted for war. They were waiting. Damon Wolf reined in his horse, his face livid. There they are. Get ready, men. Brody, give the order. But before the sheriff could speak, another rider emerged from behind the Apache line. A woman in a simple buckskin dress, her blonde hair catching the afternoon sun. Alice. And beside her, on a borrowed horse, looking pale but very much alive, was Silas Wolf. A collective gasp went through the posse. This was not what they had been told. "Father!" Silas cried out, his voice cracking. "Stop! You have to stop!" "Silence, boy!" Damon roared, his eyes wild. He was losing control of his own narrative. "He's been bewitched by them. They're using him as a shield. Fire!" He raised his own rifle, aiming not at Kyle, but at Alice. She was the heart of the truth, and he had to cut it out. But in that split second, two things happened. From the high ridges, a single terrifying war cry echoed. Tassa, making his presence known. The men in the posse looked up, seeing the glint of rifles aimed down at them. They were in a trap. And on the ground, Kyle moved with the speed of a striking snake, spurring his horse directly into the path of Damon's aim. At the exact same moment, another horse burst from the posse's own ranks. It was Clara Mayfield, Alice's sister. Her face was streaked with dust and tears. After Silas fled, her guilt had become unbearable. She had gone to Sheriff Brody, not with a whisper, but with a full-throated confession, telling him everything. Brody, his conscience finally winning over his fear, had agreed to ride with her, hoping to head off a massacre. "He's lying," Clara screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Damon. "Wolf is the liar. Alice saved me. She's innocent. He sent her away to hide his son's shame." The posse froze, caught between the rifles above, Kyle's stand below, and the raw, undeniable truth in the young girl's voice. They looked from Clara to a living Silas, then to the furious, cornered face of Damon Wolf. The lie had completely unraveled. "You fools!" Wolf shrieked, swinging his rifle toward Kyle. Sheriff Brody, finally acting as the lawman he was meant to be, drew his pistol. "Wolf, drop it!" But Damon was beyond reason. He fired. The shot cracked through the canyon. Kyle's horse screamed and fell, shot through the neck. Kyle leaped clear, rolling in the dust. Before Wolf could fire again, a second shot rang out, from Brody's pistol. It struck Wolf in the shoulder, knocking him clean from his saddle. The battle was over before it had truly begun. The men of the posse lowered their rifles, their faces a mixture of confusion, disgust, and relief. The lie was dead. And in the ringing silence, a new, uncertain future was about to be born. In the ringing silence that followed the final gunshot, the world seemed to hold its breath. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung in the canyon air, a stark perfume for the truth laid bare. Damon Wolf lay on the ground, clutching his bleeding shoulder, his face a mask of disbelief. The aura of invincibility that had surrounded him his entire life had vanished, leaving only a pathetic, wounded old man. The men of the posse looked from Wolf's crumpled form to the stoic line of Apache warriors, then to Alice, standing tall and resolute. The lie had been their righteousness, and now that it was gone, they were adrift in a sea of shame. Sheriff Brody, his pistol still smoking, walked stiffly to Wolf. "Damon Wolf," Brody's voice was cold iron, devoid of its usual deference. "You are under arrest for attempted murder, incitement of violence, and bearing false witness." "You can't," Wolf sputtered. "I am this town." "These people defended themselves from a lie you created," Brody cut him off, kicking Wolf's rifle away. Two men from the posse, their faces grim, moved to help the sheriff, hauling Wolf to his feet. They bound his hands, his pained gasps finding no sympathy. The other men began to turn their horses, unwilling to meet the eyes of Alice or Kyle. They had ridden out as a righteous mob and were riding back as fools who had nearly become murderers for one man's vanity. They departed not in a thunder of hooves, but in a quiet, shameful procession that was its own kind of defeat. With the posse gone, Kyle gave a series of low commands. His warriors secured the perimeter before focusing on the remaining outsider. Silas Wolf was brought forward. He knelt in the dust before Kyle and the elders, who had gathered, awaiting his fate. Taza stepped forward, his expression hard as granite. "He is the serpent's son," he said, his voice resonating with cold fury. "His weakness brought this army to our home. His father's lie was an insult to our honor, an insult that demands a blood price. He must die." Many warriors nodded in grim agreement. His logic was rooted in their tradition. Justice had to be seen. Silas closed his eyes, waiting for the end. But then Alice's voice, calm and clear, cut through the tense air. "And what justice is there in that?" she asked, stepping toward the circle. The elders turned to her. She had earned the right to speak. "Killing him will not erase his father's lies. It will not unfire the bullets. It will only continue the cycle of violence that has bled this land for generations." She looked at Nalan, whose wise eyes encouraged her. "You have taught me of Gozo," she said, using the Apache word for balance and harmony. "Is there beauty in this, or is it just more pain? His true punishment is not a quick death. It is the life he must now lead. Let him walk the earth carrying the full weight of his actions." She turned her gaze to Kyle. He stood in silence for a long moment, the fate of a man resting on his word. He looked at Taza, acknowledging the truth in his warrior's anger. He looked at Silas, a man broken by his own cowardice. Finally, his eyes rested on Alice. He saw not the white woman he had been given, but a leader in her own right, speaking with a wisdom that blended the compassion of her old world with the strength of her new one. "Alice speaks with a strong heart," Kyle declared, his voice carrying the finality of command. "His death would be an easy thing. We will not take his life." He motioned to one of his men. "Give him a skin of water." Then he looked down at Silas. "You will be banished. Walk east until this land is nothing but a memory. Tell anyone who asks that you were shown mercy by the Shirakawa Apache, so they know we are people of honor, not butchers." Silas looked up, his eyes wide with shocked gratitude. He was given the water skin and, without a word, was turned to face the rising sun. He began to walk, a lone figure disappearing into the vast wilderness, his life spared, but his soul forever marked. As the tension finally broke, Clara rushed to Alice, throwing her arms around her sister. "Alice, I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I was a coward. I let you take it all." Alice held her tight. "Hush now," she whispered. "You were scared, but you found your courage when it mattered most. You came for me." She pulled back, looking at her sister. The flighty girl was gone, replaced by a young woman with a new, somber strength. "I am so proud of you." Sheriff Brody approached them, his hat in his hands. "Miss Mayfield, Alice, there are no words. Your name is cleared. Your family will not want for anything. You are free. You can come home." The word home, it hung in the air, a powerful, complicated invitation. She could return to Prescott, to the life that had been stolen from her. She looked at Clara's hopeful face, but then her gaze drifted past them, into the valley. She saw Nalan directing women to repair a damaged drying rack. She saw Chato's young son, the boy she had healed, chasing a lizard near the creek, his laughter echoing softly. She saw the warm glow of fires being lit inside the familiar shapes of the wickiups. This was her life now. She turned back to Brody, a gentle but resolute finality in her eyes. "Thank you, Sheriff, but I think my home is here now." She smiled at Clara, a smile of love and farewell. "Please tell Father. Tell him I have found my own people. Tell him the woman he raised found her purpose. And tell him," she added softly, "that I am happy." Clara's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of understanding. She saw the peace on her sister's face, the easy way she stood on this foreign soil, the way her eyes kept finding the tall warrior standing nearby. After they had gone, and the last of the dust had settled, Kyle walked to Alice's side. The sun was painting the western peaks in brilliant strokes of crimson and gold. "You chose a hard life," Kyle said, his voice a low rumble beside her. Alice watched a hawk circle high above them, free and untethered. "I chose an honest one," she replied, turning to look at him. "Among honest people." He reached out, his calloused fingers gently touching her cheek. His touch was no longer clinical or commanding, but full of a reverence that made her heart ache with a beautiful, soaring joy. "They threw you away in shame," he murmured, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "But your spirit was too strong for their brittle world. It found its own ground to take root here, in the rocks and the pines. He smiled then, a genuine, unguarded smile that lit his entire face. I told you once that you belonged here. He drew her a half step closer, his other hand finding hers, their fingers lacing together in a perfect fit. His voice dropped to a whisper, a sacred promise meant only for her. But I was not finished. You belong right here, with me. Leaning into his strength, surrounded by the vast wild beauty of her true home, Alice Mayfield knew she was no longer a name attached to a lie. She was a woman loved, a spirit unbound. She was exactly where she belonged. Alice's journey from a pawn in a game of shame to a cherished member of a new family shows us that home isn't always the place we are born. It's the place where we are seen for who we truly are. Her story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the idea that true belonging is earned through courage, compassion, and the unwavering strength to define your own worth, even when the world tries to define it for you. She was handed away as a broken thing, but in the heart of the Wild West, she found she was whole all along. If her incredible story of survival and redemption resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button and share it with someone who loves a powerful tale from the Old West. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next journey into the dramatic, untold stories of history. Thank you for listening.